Welcome, guys. Today is our third lecture, and we are starting types of forces and force system. So, in our last lecture, we have discussed what is force. Let us recall about it. Force is a physical quantity, and it is an external agency which tries to change the state of rest or state of motion of any body or a particle. Whenever you apply force on something, it changes its states. It can be from state of motion to rest, or it can be from a state of rest to motion. For example, we can consider a moving car or any moving vehicle. You are moving with some acceleration and at a speed, something speed you are moving, and suddenly you have to stop the vehicle and you are going to apply the brake. What brake you are applying, that is an external agency or external force it is, which is an external force which is changing the state of motion into state of rest of that vehicle. Or even when a vehicle is parked and you are starting your vehicle, you are applying external force. In process of starting the vehicle, you are applying an external force which changes the state of rest to motion. So that is called it as a force. Now let us discuss what are the different types of the forces we have now. We have, very first thing, what we have, point force, and then coplanar forces. In coplanar forces, parallel force system, concurrent force system, non-concurrent force system. Again, next we have non-coplanar forces. In this also we have parallel force system, concurrent force system, and non-concurrent force system. And the last one is collinear force system. Now let us discuss what is this point force. Point force, a force which is acting at a fixed point. Point force is usually a single force which acts at a fixed point. Here there is a position O, and the force which is acting, single force which is acting at the fixed point, is called it as a point force. Only a one force acting at only one position, at any one position a single force is acting, such force will call it as a point force. For our numericals, usually you will get a problem of wall and a ladder, and this here it is a practical example of a point view. Whenever a man is climbing a ladder which is resting against the wall, and the man is moving from lower to higher position, even though his position is continuously varying, his weight is assumed to be act as a point load towards the ground surface. This is a very good example of a point force, and it is practically used example where the man weight is assumed to be act as a concentrated weight towards the ground. It is a very much good example of a point force in practice. Next we have coplanar force system. Here coplanar word itself defines what it is. Coplanar, a common plane. Co means common, planar means plane. Coplanar force system. The forces, it may be two or more, any number of forces which are having a common plane are called it as a coplanar force system. And similarly, non-coplanar force system. Non-coplanar is definitely a opposite of a coplanar. That is, no similarities, or there is no common plane between the forces. If two or more forces are acting in the different planes, then it is said to be non-coplanar force system. And next what we have, it's our coplanar concurrent force system. Which type it is? Here we have classified coplanar. In this, concurrent and non-concurrent forces we have, that we are going to study in detail. Coplanar concurrent force system. Coplanar, again a common plane. Concurrent is nothing but it is concentrated towards one single point. When all the forces are concentrating at one point, we'll call it as a concurrent forces. So what we can define from this? forces having common point of line of action. This is common point of line of action. It is nothing but line of action means the line along which forces are acting. This is the line of a force 1. Line of action of the force 1 is the line along which the forces are acting. And this is the line of a F2. Likewise, and what it is saying, forces having a common point of line of action and also having a common plane called as coplanar force system. Common plane and a common point of line of action. Even you can also define it as two or more forces which are acting in a common plane and concentrating or meeting at a one single point, or called it as coplanar concurrent force system. For example, you have here one xx plane. You have, this is the front view of a cube where you can see clearly the forces are acting. Forces are F1, F2, F3, F4 and F5. All these 5 forces are acting in the single plane and they are emerging out from the one single point. They have joined here. All the forces, they are able to join at this point. This point is called it as common point of line. Common point is called it as concurrent forces. Here what they are having, their point of line of action is meeting at one single point. This is a concurrent force system. Again we have here 3 forces, F1, F2 and F3. These are also acting in one single plane. That is, I have considered here plane YY. They are meeting at one point, or they are emerging out from the one plane. They, or we can also say their line of action is meeting at one single point. Such forces are called as coplanar concurrent forces or coplanar concurrent force system. And now we do not call the number of forces as a forces. We'll call it as, when 2 or more forces are there, we'll call it as a force system. Together we'll consider it. Next, coplanar non-concurrent force system. Again, coplanar means what? Common plane. Non-concurrent, there is no force concentrating. None of the force are concentrating at any point. Or we can say line of action, they are not meeting at one single point. Such forces will call it as coplanar non-concurrent force system. Here we can see the definition. When 2 or more forces are acting in a single plane but with different line of action, called it as coplanar non-concurrent force system. Here what I have considered, one plane I have considered, whereas number of forces are acting, any of the forces not meeting out to with the another force of line of action of another force. In such case we can say it as coplanar non-concurrent force system. Here this is the problem we can consider here. This is actually what your problems look like. In future classes you can see there is a beam here over which force 1, F1, F2, F3 and F4 are acting. Here the two forces F1 and F2, these are non-concurrent forces because they are not meeting at any point, whereas these two, they are concurrent force system. They are emerging out from the one single point. Together this whole system we can consider it as coplanar non-concurrent force system. Next what we have, coplanar parallel force system. Again, coplanar means what? Common plane, and parallel means the forces which are parallel to each other. We can define it as 2 or more forces acting in a single plane but their line of action is parallel to each other. Here in the figure 1, when all the forces are acting in a single direction, we will call it as like parallel forces. When the direction of the forces are different from each other, here we have two directions. One is upwards, another is here downwards. In such case, we'll call it as unlike parallel forces. Our next type is non-coplanar concurrent force system. Here non-coplanar means what? There is no common plane. The forces, different forces are acting on the different planes. Concurrent, but the different forces which are acting on a different plane are concentrating at one point, or called it as non-coplanar concurrent force system. And the definition will be, two or more forces acting on different planes but have common line of action, called it as non-coplanar concurrent force system. Here we can see a cube. X, Y and Z directions are shown. Different forces are acting on the different planes here. All the 6 planes which are acting, forces are acting on the 6 planes, but they are meeting at one particular point. That force system will call it as non-coplanar concurrent force system. And next we have non-coplanar non-concurrent force system. In this case, you can see the name itself says non-coplanar. There is no common plane. Non-concurrent. Neither they have a common plane, nor the forces are concentrating at one point. Such force system will call it as non-coplanar non-concurrent force system. Example you can see in this figure here. This lower face having one force, side face having another. Here also in side face having the two forces, and again top view is having the forces in different direction. The forces, two or more forces are acting on the different planes, and they are not even concentrating at any one point. They are not concentrating. Such forces will call it as non-coplanar non-concurrent force system. Forces acting on different planes and do not intersect each other or do not have common line of action, called as non-coplanar non-concurrent force system. And another type what we have, non-coplanar parallel force system. What is happening here? Non-coplanar, different planes. The forces acting on the different planes, but line of action is parallel to each other. Here either it may be a like parallel, likewise here, and here like parallel we have, or it may be unlike parallel. So we can define what? Forces acting on the different planes but parallel to one another are called non-coplanar parallel force system. And similarly what we have here, collinear force system. Collinear force system, two or more forces acting along a single common line, called it as a collinear force system. Collinear, common, co is common, co defines for what? Common, linear, line, common line. There is one common line between all the forces. If all the forces there is only one common line, the case may be somewhat like this. So the forces which are two or more forces which are acting along a single common line, call it as collinear or collinear force system. Thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel.